Hey everybody. With the close of Deadman Mode Armageddon for 2024, I want to go ahead and put out a video going over a bit of a critique as well as offer some feedback for this year's Deadman Mode and some changes that I'd like to see for the format moving forward. I want to preface this by talking about my experience a little bit just so that you know how I engage with Deadman Mode, since there are a lot of different ways to play it. But for me, I did play for all 2 weeks quite a bit. And I played entirely solo. I didn't really have like a clan or a team that I was working with. And I also didn't do any kind of swapping in either direction. I also streamed almost the entirety of it, pretty much all of it, except for a little bit of like questing and achievement diaries that I did in the second week. But I did not take any donations from my viewers. I think I got like an Elder Maul in like the last couple of hours, but I think that's probably not that big of a deal. Initially, my plans with Deadman Mode was I wanted to go hard for about a week or so, and then when it stopped being fun for me, I would just swap it for 07 gold and basically cash out and then just either have fun or just quit, basically. And about halfway through, I realized that I actually did kind of want to see how far I could push it, and I decided to go for high scores and the leaderboards with the goal of getting onto the front page. Luckily, I was actually able to achieve this goal, ending at rank 15, which I'm very happy for, considering this is only my second time doing Deadman Mode, and this is really my first time ever going for leaderboards in one of these seasonal game modes. I don't really PK, and as such, most of my experience and content was as primarily a prey, not a predator, where I would escape PKers, but I'm not actually seeking out to kill them. That being said, I don't hate PvP. I actually really enjoy LMS, and I've been playing it quite a bit. I just don't really enjoy the, I guess, the unfair fights that you take with PKing. Like, it's just not that fun for me to, I guess, like, go and kill, like, helpless players. I'd rather play on more equal terms. I prefer more of the fair fights, which is why I do play a lot of fighter games and stuff like that. I play League of Legends, so I'm not entirely like a single player person. I still enjoy PvP. I just like it when it's on, I guess, even grounds. If there was one word I could use to describe Deadman Mode, it would be exhausting, both in the amount of hours that I invested into the game over the course of the 2 weeks and how little sleep I was getting, but also in just how tedious the game is and how some of the rules and some of the features of the Deadman Mode really do start feeling like a chore and drag the entire experience down for me. Compared to something like Leagues, I think the highs are a lot higher, but the lows are a lot lower, and those do kind of tend to stick out and drag it more compared to, some of the more positive experiences. I don't mean to be negative throughout this video. My intention is not to remove Deadman Mode or talk about how awful it is or any of that. I think I actually see so much potential in the Deadman seasonal mode, and I would really, really hope that just with a couple changes to address some of these problems, I feel like it would actually appeal to a lot broader players and really become a very beautiful game mode that I think a lot of people would enjoy. Before I go into some pointed criticisms, I did want to talk about some general changes that they made with this specific one, with Deadman Mode Armageddon, that I personally found to be amazing. I think the 2-week format was a great change, and especially as somebody who was trying to compete for leaderboards, I found that 2 weeks was like just enough time where I felt like I could really, invest in and kind of go hard without completely burning myself out or like hating the game. I really hope that Leagues takes inspiration from that, because quite simple, when I'm looking at going for high scores in Leagues and it's like 6 or 8 weeks, I just can't see myself investing that much time into grinding. And if they do want to go for, a longer season in Leagues, which I absolutely think it should be 6 to 8 weeks, I would hope that instead maybe the competitive season only lasts 2 weeks, and at that point the leaderboards are basically cemented, and then people can still continue to grind points to hit like the Dragon Cup thresholds and whatnot, but you don't have to literally invest like 2 months of your time into just non-stop grinding. I think there's a reason why so many people in the high score like leaderboard chasers of Leagues actually have advocated for a daily time limit, which I think is a really bad idea, because that's not very fun for people. But it's just because I think even they realize that it just comes down to an unhealthy amount of hours playing the game, and I think 2 weeks is it's reasonable enough. Possibly my favorite change to Deadman Mode is giving you unlimited run energy. I really can't stress just how great this is and how much better it is to have unlimited run energy when you're going through account progression. It made questing just so much more fun and so much easier, and you didn't have to rely on one of the stamina sigils to get that. It was basically just defaulted. Speaking of quests, though, I would really love to see some kind of option that allows you to skip cutscenes in quests at this point, just because I have done so many of these quests over and over and over again with the seasonal modes. I really wish that I could just skip these cutscenes because they take forever to do, and especially in Deadman mode, I'm pretty sure that people could actually attack you while you're still stuck in the cutscene. So there's a couple places where I literally would just go there, hold spacebar, and pray that nobody happened to run up on me at the time. I really love that they brought cosmetics to Deadman mode because I do think it gives a little bit more incentive for players to kind of get into it and give it a shot, even if they've never played Deadman, even if they're not, very big on PKing. And I think that the actual like price that was set for them, you only needed 30,000 for all the points, was pretty fair. And realistically, I don't think that should be too much of a trouble for somebody who can kind of get in there. And you can get most of that in a fairly safe manner. So I like the cosmetics. I think that they could definitely, keep bringing those back as long as it's not set too expensive so that people don't feel like they really have to force themselves to play all that much if they're not enjoying the format. And at the end of the day, it is cosmetics. So I don't really feel too bad if you don't want to do it. Like, it's just a cosmetic at the end of the day. And one thing I really liked about this year's Deadman mode was that I don't think that there were any like major problems. There was no like insane bugs that, caused a lot of scandals or anything like that. I remember last season in Deadman mode, there was a big issue of people buying the Void set from the Emblem Trader and then selling that back at the like pest control area, and they would basically make like insane amounts of gold, or they would get experience that would just boost all their combat levels really fast. And I don't think I saw anything like that in this league. Most of it was pretty tame and nothing like I think too crazy as far as like bug abuse. I think there was an issue with the Morgan Javelins in the PK sphere, but I just don't know enough about that to really talk about it. I heard that it was pretty bad, but okay. And starting off with my biggest issue of Deadman mode, and that's regearing and bank keys. I'm not lying, guys. I think that this is by far the worst part of Deadman mode, and I will likely not be playing much of the next Deadman mode if the regearing and bank keys are not overhauled or just scrapped entirely, because I really do think that this is just the worst part, and it makes it so frustrating to play the game. I can only really guess at the upsides or the benefits of having bank keys and regearing, so I'll try to touch on them, but I just really don't see any of them playing out in a meaningful way. So I really just think that this whole entire system needs to go. Let me paint a picture. It's already incredibly tilting when you die in Deadman mode because, it's somebody else killing you, which is obviously, that can be annoying. And on top of that, you're also losing your entire inventory and gear, which is a pretty substantial loss. However, I think it reaches a little bit too far when you are also losing the top 10 most valuable stacks in your bank, whether that be supplies, gear, really could be anything, runes, etc. This is so frustrating because most of the time I don't even know what I lost. There's no way of like checking, oh, these are the 10 items that you lost after your death. You can only check it before. And this would lead to this constant problem where every single time I had to leave a safe area, I was constantly having to check what 10 items I was losing just to make sure that there wasn't anything that important there. And, when I did leave, I would always have this paranoia of like, oh man, what if I accidentally forgot to throw like my corrupted scythe in the deposit box? What if I accidentally left it in my bank instead? And I would just constantly have to check that because the fear of making a mistake there and accidentally putting in your bank versus the deposit box was just always an issue. The big problem here is just how much harder it is to stock up on rebuilds after you die, as the only thing that you're really limited to here is your 10 slots in your deposit box, which are often just relegated to really high value items anyway, because once you do get a high value item, you can't really just put it on the GE since all of your Grand Exchange offers are also lost when you die. If you want to sell off one of these items, you have to sit in the Grand Exchange until it's done. So I think myself and most players would rather just keep those items in the deposit box and then sell them off to fund your rebuild. Even if you did have all 10 of those slots, used for a full rebuild, so that as soon as you get them, you just take them out, you would still have to then buy a completely new set anyways to repopulate your deposit box. You're not actually changing the problem by using the deposit box. You're just offsetting when you actually have to do it. If you don't buy a new set before you go back out, you are risking dying and then not having anything in your deposit box, right? So I don't think the deposit box is the answer here to regearing. In my opinion, you should be able to buy 10 black d'hide sets, 10 sets of mystic robes, 10 zombie acts, whatever you'd like. And then as soon as you die, you would just pull out that set, get back out there and keep playing the game. That should be, I think, the gameplay loop of Deadman mode. Old school RuneScape's Wilderness has a really simple mantra: don't take what you're not willing to lose, and I think that that should be applied to Deadman mode as well. Whatever you take with you is at risk, but everything in your bank is still safe. It makes it so much easier to grasp what it is you're risking when it's literally just your inventory and your gear, and not also the 10 additional stacks in your bank that you have to constantly be worrying about and micromanaging. Remember that these stacks aren't just items that you'll be using, but it's also any kind of supplies, such as Revenant Ether, Sunfire Splinters for the Quiver, runes, potions, Zulrah scales, things like that, that I would constantly have to keep rebuying over and over again after every single death. And even if I didn't die, I think, buying these like every couple of hours, just because, there's no point in stocking up on like 300 Saradomin brews if one death is going to wipe out 90% of those. Most of these items tend to be pretty high value, so I can't really stock up on a giant set of supplies. Instead, I'm just buying them like every hour or so. Now, maybe this is actually the point, to not allow you to return, and as soon as somebody kills you, you just grab a full set of gear, come back, and, PK them back. But I think that that's actually an okay thing if that's what you want to do. If somebody kills you and then they continue to camp the spot, I feel like you should have the right to fight them back and, and win over them. They should have to move somewhere else if they don't want to have their position broadcast. I don't like the idea of being put in like a timeout before you can really go back and play the game. And that's exactly how regearing feels whenever you die. I would honestly rather be put into Port Sarim jail for like 10 minutes and just sit there watching paint dry, because holy moly, every single time I died, it just felt like I could not go and play the game. I had to go through this long process. Sometimes it would take me like 30 minutes of selling off sigils, alking halos, selling off deposit box items, rebuying all my items, rebuying all my supplies like brews and restores, grabbing my Barrow's gloves again, which are lost on death, repairing any kind of broken gear, so like an infernal cape or a quiver that broke, rebuying your Nezi helm, grabbing your Ring of Shadows from Desert Treasure 2 again, that's also lost on death, you can't stock up on those. And then with all the excess gold that you would have after doing all that, now you have to rebuy those items because your gold stack would be lost on death. So now I have to go ahead and rebuy items, reinvest them, put them back into the deposit box, make sure that my top 10 stacks aren't anything important now, because, now that I lost my 10 stacks, maybe something else is important now. Okay, after all that's done, now I can go play the game finally. Maybe I'm just a miser and most people don't go to this level of penny pinching to make sure that they're not losing bank value. But for me, this was by far the most tilting part of the game whenever I died. If you've watched my streams, you could probably tell I do get pretty tilted whenever I get PK'd, but I can't stress this enough that it was not about dying or losing a fight. It was not about getting run up on, and it was not really even about losing all my items and gear. I'm happy to take that risk. The frustrating part for me was always that I felt like I was put on this timeout period before I could go back and play the game. It was an insane amount of tedium, and it made me want to quit every single time that I died, especially when I was streaming, because I felt like for the next like 20 minutes or so, I'm just going to be sitting in the GE, buying, selling items, and I would just rather turn off the stream at that point and just do it off stream later while I'm eating food or something. Some people may think that this system of bank keys is good because it forces some kind of risk. You can't just go out in absolute rags and then, go farm stuff, literally risking nothing, not in your inventory or your bank. However, a lot of the times when I did die, I found that it was so much faster to just buy a rag set again. And oftentimes, if you're using some really bad stuff, things like monk robes, for example, those usually aren't in your top 10 stacks anyway, so you can get them out and regear instantly. And just get back out there fast. So I feel like the game mode actually incentivized me not to go and buy any kind of good gear or to risk much after I died. Getting a decent set, things like barrows and all that stuff, requires way more merching, way more selling off sigils, selling off depot boxes, alking, all of that stuff to reconsolidate your money and get back out there just to, if it happens again, well, now you're back in that timeout period. I think one idea is that this is necessary to speed up the economy. In a fit of rage after they die, people will just, sell off their stuff and buy stuff for these like incredible price margins. But on the flip side, I also think that the way that Grand Exchange offers and losing them on death made me avoid selling off most of my big ticket items until I went to bed. I hardly ever wanted to keep an offer up on the Grand Exchange because, if I die, I lose all of that, right? I hardly ever would actually sell off my items, and they would just kind of sit there and collect rust because, I didn't want to do a like 2 hour grand exchange session to consolidate all of my cash into other items and other sigils every time I did hit one of these drops. It would just kind of sit there until I was, I guess, ready to do that. The thing is that it wasn't really so much about fetching a really good price overnight. It was more about the idea that even if I did sell that item for like a whatever price, I would then have to also go ahead and spend that money as well, buy some sigils, buy other items, all of that stuff that, it adds up to so much time that it was just, I just felt like I'm just going to hold this item forever, basically. And then when I die, I guess I'll just rebuild with it. The flip side is also true. I would often be discouraged from buying items because, I'm not going to go and put up like a 10 mil offer for something if I only have like 2 mil gear, because I'm essentially 6 timesing my risk. When I go out, I would lose all of that 10 mil as well. And I'm not even getting to use it. I'm risking 12 mil, but I'm only using 2 mil gear at that point. That makes 0 cents. So, again, most of my money was just invested in depot box or in sigils. I couldn't even put up GE offers unless I wanted to sit there and wait for them. Especially early on in the mode, it's really not even about the price. It's the fact that most of these items just don't exist on the market. And if I do want to, snatch one of them, I need to either risk having a giant offer on the Grand Exchange, which is insane, or I just have to sit there in the GE and just kind of like wait till somebody puts it up, which, yeah, that was really annoying. The key thing to note here is that Deadman mode will always have death. I think it's become a very big thing that you just need to embrace. You will die, you will get PK'd. It's going to happen to everybody. And so I think that the goal of the game should be to encourage you to get back out there when you do die, not have you go through this huge hassle of sitting in the GE just so you can go back and play the game. Something I hope resonates with a lot of you is how frustrating it would be to die at a breach very early on in like the first couple of minutes when you get there. The breach only lasts 15 minutes, so if you die within the first 5 minutes or so, now you have only 10 minutes to like hyper speed buy whatever bad setup you can and just like spam sell any items that you can go through. Or you know what, you just say, hey, screw it, I'm just gonna go completely naked with like a looting bag and like a dragon simi or something and just pick up random items off the ground just so I can sell them off later on. If you don't do this, you're basically forced to just sit out the entire breach, which is just awful. Like, that feels really damn bad. If you die at a breach, you should be allowed to go back out there, not, sit outside watching through the window as everybody else has fun and you're waiting to buy up a mystic set. I think the problem of regearing needs to be made a lot easier, and one suggestion I had in mind was that your starter setup that you get from the box every time you die could be upgraded as you move to the higher brackets. Maybe it would give you a set of mystics, maybe a dragon scimitar, some black d'hide, something like that, just so that when you do die, you kind of have a setup that at least lets you go and get back out there within just a few minutes. They could put a small cooldown on this just to avoid people like abusing this and spam dying to bring alks into the game. But honestly, with how much, alks are brought into the game already through like breaches and stuff like that, I don't think that this would be a problem if like one death every hour gave you a full setup again. And so the big culprit in all of this is bank keys and the fact that you can't really store and build wealth in your bank. You can only use the deposit box or sigils. I feel pretty confident in saying that bank keys only serve to punish casual and new players to Deadman mode and don't really do much past that. If you play a lot of Deadman mode, there's kind of a point where you have enough random supplies from the breaches and a good amount of cash now, and you stocked up a lot of sigils, which again aren't lost on death, so they serve as a semi-permanent way to hold wealth, and you've got enough points from the emblems that you can just buy up and alk items and sell items, and you probably have access to a couple of reliable money makers that at the end of the day, even if you do lose like a couple 100k, or maybe you left the black mask in your bank because you couldn't, all your deposit box slots were filled up, at the end of the day, it just doesn't really matter all that much. So you just don't need to always be so intent on like merching your bank stacks and making sure that you're kind of always keeping your money in a a more liquidable method. To be clear, it's still problematic as you do keep losing supplies and stuff like that. So you can never really build like a big bank of brews and things like that. It was just less annoying to have to constantly worry about selling off, 100k of like, oh, there's a rune plate body here, some gold or addy or things like that. For me, this happened about a week in or so when I was starting to farm Vorkath and I had good sigils and a decent setup for that. Because even with like a dragon longsword at that point, I felt like I could kill Vorkath and make a really good amount of money. It's kind of a money printer right there. Speaking of Vorkath, one of the big problems of losing stacks and losing GE offers is that after every single trip of Vorkath, I felt like I had to go ahead and sell off and reconsolidate my cash literally every single time because so much of Vorkath's items are Superior Dragon Bones, alchable items, Dragon Bolts, things like that, I can't just leave in my bank because if I do die, I will just lose all of that. Those are really high value items, and it would be pretty silly to just leave a couple million just lying around there every time I go out for a trip. This made me really enjoy sticking to bosses that had, one-off insane unique items. That way, when I did hit that item, I could just go ahead and deposit box it and not really have to think about it. And I could go right back out there, keep playing for the day. And only when I either filled my deposit box fully or when I was kind of done for the day, I could sell them overnight. The thing is, though, is that I don't think most players ever hit that tipping point where losing your bank keys just doesn't matter anymore. And so they'll instead continue to just bring, I guess, bad gear, especially in the lower brackets where I don't think people have access to very good money printers such as Vorkath. The game mode continues to be frustrating them where they lose all of their permanent wealth over and over again before they're able to invest in bigger sigils and things like that. Regardless of that, you are still far better off packing your bank with absolute worthless junk that just happens to have a high value price and will count as one of your top 10 most valuable stacks. This is things like oak logs, iron ore, raw trout, raw salmon, cooked salmon, leaping salmon, all of these things that, like, most of them you could buy for less than 5 GP a pop, and you could buy them by the thousands. A stack of 5,000 oak logs that you bought for 10,000 total is still a lot cheaper than like a rune plate body or a black d'hide body that you might have lost otherwise by not just investing and buying this just random garbage junk. Now, you may consider this to be emergent gameplay, and it is, but it is still tedium that you're using to game the system and not really have to deal with bank keys. It's another chore that you have to do before you can go and play the game again every single time you die. Okay, let me put up all my offers on all of these garbage things and just, flood my bank with more garbage for the next person to kill me and open up. You may find it cool to bypass it like that, but again, it does punish new players who don't know about this or just aren't aware that this is what you do to basically cheat bank keys and not have to deal with them. It also ruins the thrill of opening up a major bank key, which I'm sure some people probably value, that feeling of, oh, I'm going to go open up their bank key and look at all the items I'm going to get. It's a lot more disappointing when you open up the key and it's completely worthless supplies. There's nothing good there at all. It's just, did they remember to flood their bank with junk? An even bigger problem is the prominence of mules in Deadman mode. Mules are alternate accounts that players will use to trade off their gold, supplies, big ticket items, and then they'll plant that account somewhere safe where it continues to sell off and buy items in the Grand Exchange, basically completely risk-free. They just sit in the safe zone the whole time. Upon dying on the main account, they'll simply trade back all the GP and items that they need, while that alt account, the mule, just continues to hold it all without really ever risking it. Now, I can't pinpoint the exact number of how many players actually use mules, but I would not be surprised if more than 50% of players who played Deadman mode for most of its runtime and really played it had access to mules in some capacity. To be clear, mules are explicitly prohibited, but I do not believe that this is enforced in any meaningful capacity unless you are blatantly doing so, or you're a winner of the prize pool money, which is obviously a select few. Even then, it's only a disqualification from the prize money. It is not a ban. Whether this is a skilling alt that conveniently needs 25 mil gold just to sit in the Grand Exchange for a few days, or perhaps a clan member that functions as a clan bank and then instantly resupplies member while also giving away for all the other members to dump their wealth and not even have to think about all the items they acquire, there's going to be a lot of gray areas of what really constitutes a mule and allows players to kind of skirt the lines while still easily allowing one to store their wealth without losing time in the Grand Exchange. With this in mind, it's simply too easy to bypass bank keys via junk stacks, and it's too easy to cheat and ignore the mechanic altogether via mules. It's at the point now where I would not only endorse muling, but I would honestly encourage you to do so for future Deadman modes if bank keys and losing Grand Exchange offers are not completely scrapped. As it stands, the process of rebuying and reselling gear is just so tedious with really no upsides, especially when other players are using mules. And again, it really only punishes casual and new players who aren't, buying up junk or just don't have the goal to not care about it as much. I want to be clear though that even if somehow all these junk stacks and all the mules were magically addressed, it would still be really bad. Like regearing would still be awful and annoying, having to lose all your supplies and having like that's not the fix. Isn't fixing mules or fixing the junk items. It's still bad even without those. They just make it so that you don't have to engage with the system whatsoever. I don't think that entertaining other options is really even worth talking about, as removing bank keys should just be the obvious fix, and not losing grand exchange offers. That should just happen. I don't think there should be anything else even talked about. I've considered like a 500k fee that you have to pay that like locks your bank and saves it, just as a way to still invoke some risk when you go out. But the problem here is that whatever price point this is set at will always have the same issue of being a tipping point, where I feel like the rich players would basically pay it every single time with no question. Like I would never not pay 500k to not lose my bank. I would do that every single time. And poor players who are still struggling to kind of build that permanent wealth and create a lot of bank value, they would have to either eat that loss every time, or again, they're just punished by losing their bank. I think that getting rid of bank keys might encourage some players to go and with absolute rag gear and try to take on monsters. But like, to me, who cares? Those players are not getting good kill times anyways. And if you do run into somebody wearing like monk robes or something like that, you can kill them with literally any gear as long as you're willing to risk it. Like, I think that should be fine. If somebody wants to bring absolute rag gear, you should be able to just walk up to them and kill them. That's it. You know what I mean? Like, hey, this is my spot now. GTFO. You may think that the fee that I described sounds a lot like Guardian Angel, which is already a sigil, right? Isn't that just a solution? And you're kind of right, although keep in mind that Guardian Angel does not save your grand exchange offers, so that problem is still not fixed even when using Guardian Angel. But the even bigger downside of using Guardian Angel is you're having to invest a sigil slot when that could be a combat slot or a skilling slot instead. So you're down one slot to have to deal with bank keys, and again, you'd be better off just using a mule or filling your stuff up with junk. Furthermore, it's also not a particularly cheap sigil. Guardian Angel is quite rare and quite expensive. These would have to be way, way more common and not take up a slot for this to be seen as like a proper solution to losing your bank keys and losing all that and having to deal with the regearing process. If Guardian Angel costs like 4 mil to use, unless your bank value is more than 4 mil, which is super unlikely for most players. I mean, I doubt most people have a more than 4 mil bank unless you're really one of the higher end players. You would actually be throwing away money by using it instead of just selling off your Guardian Angel when you die because the Guardian Angel is consumed. I think bank keys really just allow the rich to get richer. Players who have a lot of wealth and don't care, they can eat the risk. They can not have to deal with it, while I guess casual players are just constantly having to lose their bank value, which is often going to be items that I think are actually kind of important to them. I really, really hope the system goes. I don't know if I'll play, and if I do, I'll probably just mule because it just makes the game playable, in my opinion. Next, I wanted to talk about the information and knowledge gap in Deadman mode, something that I'm sure many of you probably struggled with, especially if this is something that you're new to, you haven't played a lot of Deadman before. It is incredibly difficult to find any good information about Deadman mode, and even as somebody who's a content creator who makes guides for Deadman mode to get people up, I really, really struggled to actually verify what I was seeing because I didn't want to put out wrong information when there's already so much contradictory information going around that I didn't want to become more of a part of the problem because I couldn't verify it on my own. I really think that there needs to be a full documentation of all of the Deadman mode changes in like one clean source that somebody can refer to and look and see exactly what's different for Deadman mode compared to the regular game, because without it, it really feels like it's just a knowledge check that players who have been playing this mode for like 7 or 8 years just know, and it's just expected for them. Whereas if you're new, you're going to be figuring that out usually through the hard way. I think this probably should also be done for the Wilderness as well, because holy crap, there are so many changes to the Wilderness compared to the regular game that just, if you don't know them, I guess you just don't know them, and that's just how it works. Just as an example of some of the more inconsistent rules that I've seen, some areas don't allow you to save your auto cast when you switch to a like staff, for example. Zulrah being a good example here because you do often use magic and ranged, and I eventually just dropped the magic setup altogether because every single time I would swap to my staff, it would lose my auto casting. Even though this is an instance, I don't understand why it's just doesn't save it here. Keep in mind, however, that it does work in raids. You can save your auto cast there when you swap weapons. So in raids it works, in Zulrah it doesn't. Not really sure why, because they're both in their own separate area, but yeah, pretty annoying. One thing I'd really love to see made normal is the ability to shift click to walk under somebody. Sure, this might make freezing and walking under them a little bit I guess more beginner friendly or easier to do, but it's just really frustrating as somebody who's been a PVM player to have to, and I've kind of built that muscle memory of shift click to walk under. Now I have to like learn to do the right click to walk under. I just really don't like it. I don't know why it's there, and I feel like it's just literally like PKers gatekeeping it just to keep it difficult so that noobs have a harder time freeze logging. So much of Deadman to me felt like figuring out these rules as I go, either from another source or, you just happen upon it and you're like, oh, I guess that this is how this rule works. Did you know that dragons give 2 times the bones, including Vorkath? Did you know that you don't get Slayer experience in instances, but you do get Slayer experience when you do Jad or Zuck tasks, making them some of the best Slayer tasks in the entire game? Did you know that you can't enter raids in combat, so if somebody's PKing you outside, you can't enter it? Did you know that you can't do raids while you have PvP protection, so if you use your PvP protection for that, you just wasted all that time? Did you know that you can't get tier 3 sigils until bracket 3? Did you know that Rigor and Augury no longer require 70 defense in Deadman mode? Did you know that you can't teleport to the Desert Treasure 2 bosses? Did you know that the Desert Treasure 2 bosses only have 2 times drop rate instead of 4 times drop rate? Just kidding. That's actually been changed again because they messed up in the past. So actually, yeah, they do have 4 times drop rate. It took me like 15 minutes to actually confirm, and honestly, I'm still not entirely sure. There's a lot more that I could talk about, but I think you get my point. There's so much inconsistencies that you kind of have to figure out on your own and really hurt to not know. Some of these get closer to the bug territory, so I don't want to be super nitpicky on this. But for example, Slaughter didn't really work. It says it would cost 60 points. It actually cost 30 points, and then about a week in, I think they nerfed it back to 60, which is a pretty massive nerf considering how much more points you're losing on every single one. I really do feel bad for everybody who didn't get their Slayer done early because, yeah, the nerfed Slaughter is a lot worse. Another good example was how some Halos would alch for a really good price, which made this the most cost-efficient way of spending your emblem points. You would buy like Zamorak or I think Saradomin Halos as well and alch them for like 130k. But I think some of the other ones, like I think the Ancient Halo would just alch for like 500 GP. I don't know why that is. That feels like a huge bug. And yeah, if you didn't figure out the alch, if you didn't figure out that you could alch Halos, I'm pretty sure Regearing was a lot worse. I think that safe zones should be very clearly marked, and especially when you're moving out of a safe zone, it should be really obvious that you're stepping into somewhere dangerous. Maybe this could be like a little bit of a highlight on the ground or just something that lets you know what's safe and what isn't. And the same is true with multi-zones when there really are some of these random multi-zones out there. I found that I absolutely needed the plugin Wilderness Lines and Multi-Lines, which would show you when the level 30 teleport is, and also they would show you all the multi-lines in the game. So you don't accidentally run into like Drainer and oh wow, this place just happens to be multi. You just died because there's a bunch of rot members that are logging in and all killing you all at the exact same time. In addition, I'd really like to see an updated full map of what is safe and what isn't. I understand that things like going into the Lumbridge basement, it's probably hard to mark that as like, oh, this is now dangerous. But if there is some way on the map to perhaps toggle an overlay that showed you what's safe and what's not, I think that would really go and help out players a lot. Because I feel like when you step into somewhere dangerous, that should be a choice you make, not an accident that goddamn, now I'm just dead here because I didn't know that I could die here. So much information in this game, I felt, relies heavily on going to external sites, mainly the OSRS wiki, which unfortunately I don't think was updated with a lot of information about Armageddon until like the morning of. And outside of that, I felt like I was just searching through old tweets from JMods. I was going back to old Deadman modes and just hoping that the rules were still consistent. I think I found more information and more updates on the PvP Discord, which I had to join because I was just missing so much information and not getting anything. Even the official video that they put up of Deadman mode wasn't even entirely accurate. There were some pretty big mistakes in like the first couple of minutes talking about the drop rates. And, I think that's pretty bad that even that's not being fact checked. By far, the most asked question I was getting throughout all of Deadman mode was, when is the next breach? Because there's no way of finding out when the next breach is in game. There's not even a notification that tells you like, hey, the next breach is in 15 minutes. Go get ready for it. You just kind of have to know, or you have to like look up on the OSRS wiki or something like that. Eventually, I had it all kind of ingrained in my mind because I was planning my sleep schedule around it anyways, but I don't think that that's good. I feel like there should be some guy you could talk to or some kind of countdown that is very clear about when the next breach is happening. While I was writing this script, I still had no idea when the finale is, and it was in like a couple hours at that point, and I was just like, I don't know when I'm supposed to log in. I don't know when the Bracket 5 finale is in. I guess I'm just gonna wait and see. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now. And in addition, all of the prices on the Deadman mode are impossible to actually find out in game. You basically have to have some kind of external GE tracker open at all times. I had one on my other monitor, literally the entire Deadman mode, because you can't find those prices in game. They're based off of the main game prices, so they're completely wrong. And you obviously don't want to be throwing something up for a completely invalid price. Moving on, let's talk about PvP and PKing. I want to go ahead and state it again that I am not primarily a PKer. That's not something I'm really a big fan of. I don't really involve myself in it. I'm not, part of the community and stuff like that. So most of what I say will be kind of from the perspective of somebody getting PK'd. And I could be wrong about some of this stuff. I'm willing to accept that. I don't think that I have all the perfect ideas of how to solve PvP in this game. That being said, my second biggest issue after regearing is progression asymmetry, or how different people, PKers and those who don't want to PK, have to approach the game in a very different way. In my opinion, Deadman mode should be about competition over resources. You want those resources and you show up at the spot, and if somebody is there, you can fight them for it. And in fact, a lot of times you have to fight them for it because spots are kind of limited. And even if you could share it, maybe you might just choose to kill them anyways and slow down their progress while you continue to speed up ahead. This creates some really amazing moments, some organic PvP, and by far my favorite moment in all of Deadman mode was actually when I was trying to do my Smoke Devil task and every single world was just full. I didn't know what to do, and I eventually resorted to saying, hey, listen, I'm sorry, but I'm grabbing my Dragon Scimitar and I'm gonna go fight whoever's there. Basically, I'm gonna kill you for the spot, and I'm gonna take it as my own. And this devolved into like a 30-minute battle between me and this other guy trying to do their Slayer task. We both wanted to do our Slayer task, and we're like fighting each other. I would push them off the spot, they would go grab gear and then push me off the spot, and we were kind of forced to PK and battle it out for the spot and bring more and more risk items to try to kill each other until eventually, even if I didn't kill the guy, they just said, okay, you know what, screw it, like, you've wasted enough of my time, you can have it. And I did actually get the spot. It was amazing. It was super, super fun. And it really, like, I don't know, to me, this is like Deadman mode at its most pure, and I really wish that more of these moments happen. Unfortunately, this was a one-off incident, and I never had anything even come close to it. Vast majority of the time, it plays out more about creating predators and creating prey. You have two entirely different classes of player with two entirely different mindsets and objectives in the game. Predators have no investment in the spot. They don't really care either way if I'm there at Smoke Devils or Cerberus. If they come to kill me, they're not trying to get the Cerberus location. They're just there to kill everybody there, get their loot, and move on to the next location. And as prey, you have little incentive to fight back. You're already at an inventory disadvantage. You're already at a sigil disadvantage because you're probably going to be bringing items and sigils that are actually going to help you, kill these bosses or farm whatever you're doing faster. But even worse is that you're at an objective disadvantage. Your goal is different from theirs. They want to be fighting you and they want to be killing you, while you just want to do like your Slayer task. So even if you do kill them, well, they're just going to come back in 5 minutes and kill you anyways. It's just wasting your time, or maybe they'll call friends and stuff like that instead. You have very little reason to fight back because it's just going to lead to more and more fighting, and you're going to just further deviate from your own objective. It's like running a marathon in the middle of a paintball match. If you bring a gun to try to fire back, you're just slowing yourself down from everybody else in that race. As it stands, neither side cares about the win condition of the other, so it really is just two entirely different games. One of the big issues here is the point system, which I really feel like is just a carrot on a stick for players to be fodder for PKers. To bring in people who have really no interest. They just either want the cosmetics or they want to go for the high scores. I really don't like the system. I think it's pretty bad for the game. And unfortunately, it's kind of emblematic of the wilderness and of PvP design as a whole in old school RuneScape. A big problem here is that it's just way too easy to get an account ready exclusively for PKing, without really having to engage with much, if any, of the game's content. You really just need to like level your stats, and that's it. I love the open economy and it is very interesting. However, because players can just swap for gold, this means that you can basically buy a full set of whatever you need to go and then get ready to go PKing. You don't have to actually acquire any wealth on your own, or, really go through, I guess, the hurdles of somebody who's not willing to go ahead and swap to make that on their own. Swapping is probably never going to go away, and really, I don't think that it should. However, with how much the gold rate becomes so comically low as you bring in more players to kind of farm gold and trade, a lot of these PKers can get a good setup with like really it's not even that expensive. They're not even spending that much in 07. It's not like they're, dropping like a bill or half a bill to get a full setup that's PK ready. Now, I don't think that like an Iron Man mode would really work, even though I would like to see it. I think that people just wouldn't really feel like they have any incentive to PK if you didn't lose your items when you die. And if you did lose your items when somebody else killed you, then people would just basically suicide to each other to like trade items that way. But I do think that the idea of having to acquire some stuff on your own and actually progress your account should be explored more. That's something that I think is really lacking in the game right now. There's already a few untradables, things like the Infernal Cape and the Quiver that, PKers do have to get, but this is a pretty small amount. Even things like quest unlocks, which are really important for the main game, are often auto-completed, so you really don't even have to do all that much questing to get things like Ancient Magics and be ready to go. The beauty of the open economy in old school RuneScape kind of works against the format here. As long as you're willing to swap and buy whatever you need, there's really not very many hurdles stopping you from doing so. I think if points are going to be the main chase of the game, and this is going to be what leaderboards are based off of, they need to be made meaningful for everybody, not just the people who are interested in cosmetics or leaderboards. Everybody should want to acquire points. I think a great idea would be to make points required to unlock more sigil slots. You have to hit certain thresholds, something similar to leagues where, once you get enough points, you get your more and more relics unlocked and get powerful as a result. This would mean that to unlock kind of your full character potential, even PKers would have to go ahead and acquire some points. I feel like, especially in these lower brackets where somebody can buy themselves 3 incredibly powerful sigils and then just kind of rain terror on everyone. I don't know if I like that compared to having to actually make some work and progress. Deadman points could also be necessary to progress through the higher brackets. So instead of just requiring level 51 combat, perhaps you need level 51 combat and 8,000 points or something like that. This would actually break up the all too common melee trading route where it really feels like everybody in the early game is doing the same quest, the Grand Tree, Monkey Madness, things like that just skyrocket your melee and boost you through it. Well, now you would have to also deviate from your route and find some way to get some points, whether that's skilling, maybe killing some bosses earlier on. I know that this could be abusable with somebody max combat staying at low points, but maybe there's a combat requirement and the point requirement just to make sure that, there's not somebody who's at level 120 and they have 2,000 points and all they do is kill people right outside of Lumbridge in one hit. Points could also be necessary to get some of the major unlocks. Instead of auto-completing quests, maybe you have to pay points or spend some kind of points to actually go ahead and unlock those quests. This would give you the option to quest on your own and get the experience, or just go ahead and invest in those points to skip them altogether. Just so that this doesn't compete with points that you might otherwise want for cosmetics, it could be similar to the renown system from Shattered Relics, a separate currency that you used for some major unlocks, such as unlocking quests, that as you played more and more, you got to unlock that unless you wanted to go ahead and do them on your own. Maybe these points could even lead to some really massive upgrades, such as Augury and Rigor, two of the most important permanent upgrades in the game that are well outside the price range for most players. Whereas, again, if you're willing to swap, you can buy this at almost any bracket along with, insanely good sigils. And now all of that money that you've swapped and invested, it's a permanent power unlock for your account that is giving you a massive advantage over everybody else who can afford it. And you don't even risk it when you die. So yeah, it's basically just okay, you invest the money and now you're just blowing past everybody else. I think the benefits of swapping need to be alleviated by reducing the benefit of getting these permanent upgrades that you never end up risking. Breaches are one of the best example of progression asymmetry. If you're looking to hit your point cap from breaches or, just farm breaches for points, you're really just wasting your time getting PK'd because breaches are the best way of getting points. So you want to be spending as much time as you can hitting monsters, not hitting other players. If somebody does attack me, my best bet is to go ahead and try to escape, get away from them, resupply, and then kind of come back and pray that they've kind of left me alone and I can get back to doing what I actually want to do there, which is attack monsters. You don't get points for PKing, which is probably a good thing as that would be really easily abused, but it does create a situation where only one party is there for points and the other one is just there to kill you. There's also a bit of a prisoner's dilemma here where you would want to bring better gear to survive getting PK'd, but that also puts a target on your back. If you bring really good gear, it feels like you do get targeted more, which wastes your time. So you're kind of better off just bringing rags and just hoping people don't target you while you blend into the mix with whatever bad gear that you're using. In addition, you're also at a massive disadvantage to hit MVP if you bring, full PvP sigils or full defensive sigils. You do need to get, I think, top 10 or top 15 to even get points from the breaches. And obviously, if you're there for points, you got to be hitting MVP. You can't just be doing, bare minimum of damage. And if you're bringing full PVM sigils, things like meticulousness, which increase your accuracy, well, now you're at a massive disadvantage if it comes to a fair fight. I don't think that this is entirely bad. I feel like the trade-off between defensive and offensive options is good. I just wish that both parties had to engage with this balance and trade off not just the one side that's there to kill monsters, while PKers will always bring a full PK setup. If points are a necessary part of the game, and that's something that everybody wants, PKers will also want to take advantage of the best method, which is breaches. If points are necessary for progression, PKers will also want to take advantage of the fastest and most efficient way of getting points, and maybe towards the end, they can try to isolate somebody and get a kill on their way out. Monsters could do way more damage to people. That way, if you're just kind of hovering around and stuff like that, you're still going to take a lot of damage, and maybe when you kill them or by doing damage to them or something like that, you could get some health back. Maybe they drop, a couple brews for every single person that did some amount of damage to it to incentivize people to actually kill them. And that way, if you're actually fighting them, you'll be burning supplies because you'll be taking a lot of damage, but you'll actually be able to get those supplies back. Maybe doing some amount of damage at the breaches could also give you like some kind of damage buff or some kind of damage reduction buff, or make drops far more rewarding. I think this would encourage people, even if you're a PKer, that you want to go get that boost. Maybe you need to do like 2,000 damage or something like that, and then you get the buff. Again, the numbers don't really matter here. These are just kind of ideas. Outside of that, I would really love to see more stuff that just draws PvP players attacking other players with the objective of killing each other, not just, PKing helpless players that have no interest in fighting back. I think one idea could be something like the Rev Caves, but the main drops there are untradeable PvP items that are really helpful for players who are primarily PKing. So perhaps there's an item that shortens your skull timer, or maybe you can get even some really good PvP items like corrupted VLS or something like that. Maybe it's not as good as a VLS, but it's just a nice, easy way to get started with PKing by going there instead. Items that aren't really helpful for PVM, but are really just there to allow you to get your wheels going, I guess, as far as PKing goes. Some of the more popular banks could also be designated as like a hotspot for an hour. Think Edgeville Bank, Castle Wars, or Canifis. Maybe that's the only bank that you can use for an hour that's not in like a safe area, which means that if you're going somewhere to get rid of your skull, that's like a hotspot. You kind of have to go there if you want to bank. Bank fights are kind of boring though, so maybe a larger area could start dropping loot. And while you're in that area, you're completely teleblocked, so you would have a little bit more of these outlast fights going on. Again, just ideas to bring people together without relying on PVM fodder. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is camping teleports. To be clear, I think that this is some of the most scummy behavior that you can do in Deadman mode, and if you do this, I don't have very much respect for you. I think you're kind of filth. But I also understand that this will probably not change, so I would really like to see some changes made to the over prominence of how many people camp teleports. I really don't like that so much of the game is looking for cheap kills or video clips that people will upload, especially from content creators. I think it's really embarrassing to the game that so many top PvPers are doing this. Players who are considered some of the best PvP players are just spam clicking fairy ring. Here's a clip of Eliop, who I think camped out this fairy ring for like 2 days straight, just spam clicking it nonstop. And as soon as somebody shows up, they eat a freeze basically. And yeah, it's pretty damn sad that this is kind of what so many are doing to, I guess, farm clips for their channels. Slightly unrelated, but their video actually does show another pretty common thing, which is the benefit of having like friends along with you to help you while you do this. You can see here that Eliop is getting very close to a kill, and unfortunately that person trades with somebody else probably trades with a friend, gives them some food, and now kind of the whole tide of the fight has been changed because that person had somebody to trade them.
They trade him.
Yeah, you traded him supplies. Fucking rat. Holy, what a retard.
Dude, I was fucking him up. I was torturing him up.
And I think their frustration here is entirely justifiable, although it is a little bit funny that in literally the exact same spot, here's Eliop and Pip trading over Teleblock and Entangle Sacks to their friend while they kill somebody. So, you know, it doesn't really go both ways, I guess.
Since Matt did most of the work, we did help him by dropping him Teleblock and Tangle Sacks, but we let him keep the 75 mil and Pip took 50 mil each.
As it stands, I feel like so much of Deadman mode devolves into this reaction test game. Literally every single time you teleport somewhere, you are just hovering your instant teleport. It's really damn frustrating. I don't mean to call out any content creator for doing this. As I understand, it is really damn popular and pretty much they all do it, but it's important to realize that they do set the tone for everybody else who also engages in the same behavior and also looks for the same cheap clips. I'm also not trying to start a witch hunt on anyone, but rather I want to provide very clear examples of this happening so that it can't be just chalked up into me being salty because I died from somebody camping a teleport. And don't get me wrong, I did die a lot of times from people camping a teleport. Here's a clip of Framed catching me as I went to go do a Slayer task, and at this point I think I was really sleepy. Watching it back, there was so much time for me to react, and I was asleep at the wheel, basically. And I'm willing to say that this is my fault. I probably could have reacted here. However, I don't even know if it's possible to react to somebody who's just absolutely spam clicking that without stop. Here's another frame clip of them spamming a fairy ring that gets dangerously close to looking like they're using an auto clicker, and I don't really know what you're supposed to do in this situation if somebody's just, doing this nonstop. For me, I found that the Wilderness Player Alarm plugin basically made the game 10 times better because it was a lot easier for my reaction speed. If, my screen flickered telling me that somebody was there when I teleport, I would just instantly teleport away, basically. And it took a lot of the edge off where I felt like I always had to keep my eyes locked to my screen, basically, waiting to see if somebody was there. Again, I don't think that there's anything to stop people from doing this. However, I think that there needs to be changes made so that the entire game doesn't feel like it revolves around this teleport reaction test while, they spam click the same spot. In my opinion, when you teleport somewhere, I feel like you should be put into some kind of stasis for like 2 to 3 seconds. That still allows you to teleport away, but, you can't move, you can't attack anybody, things like that. This would still allow people to hold down an area. Maybe you want to go ahead and camp the Slayer Tower, but you're not going to be able to just sit there and camp the Canifis Fairy Ring nonstop, just looking for one-shots on unsuspecting victims before they really even know what's going on. Raids are a huge issue here, and I really hope that something is done to make raids not the mess that they currently are. It should be a challenge to get inside of the raid, not literally impossible to get in if somebody wants to camp out there and bolt you. You cannot enter raids in combat, so your only hope is to either fight back or just come back another time. Even if you do manage to fight back and make your way in, there's the additional problem that you're not able to teleport out of a raid. You have to risk getting out and again playing the teleportation game while somebody sits there and spam clicks. I cannot stress how awful it must feel to hit a great drop. Maybe you hit a purple inside of a raid and then you lose it on the way out because you're already low on resources that you've invested for the raid. As it stands, so many people will just use a scout anyways, or they have to have some connection with a clan that will secure them passage. And I really dislike that it feels like raiding at a high level means you need to bring an alt account along that sits there completely naked, basically camping it out for you. That's just not the answer that should be necessary to get into a raid. You can see here West Ham, one of the best PKers, sitting at the exact same tile waiting for people to leave Theater of Blood, just spam clicking for like 25 minutes straight. It is really, really sad. I think that this is what people are resorting to, and this is what players have to deal with. So I'm not surprised that so many of them will just bring a scout along or ask a friend to go check for them every single time they want to leave the raid. The lobby of Tombs of Amask is one of the most annoying examples of this because it is so frustrating having to menu all your invocations while dealing with the risk of getting PK'd. And if you do, you can't even enter the raid. You have to, make your way out and play the tunnel, basically. It's just so annoying. And there's a whole mess of other clever solutions, some that I don't even know about, such as going to Chambers of Zarek with Guardian Angel equipped and nothing at all. There's a bank inside of Chambers, so if you actually manage to make it in, you can go ahead and withdraw all your stuff, and you'd only be risking your guardian angel to make it in. In addition, I've not only seen people use their scouts to kind of clear the area, but they'll also be in combat with their scout to give themselves player jack immunity, where nobody else can attack them, and they're able to basically get into the raid after their scout attacks them. This is definitely boxing. It's definitely disqualifiable, and people still do it anyways. Now, obviously, you shouldn't be able to just do infinite raids back to back and, just bank some resources and get right back in there until you hit like a great item. But I think that the main lobbies of these raids, you should be able to access them without having somebody like attacking you, and instead to just go ahead and disable the banks, such as the Tombs of Amascut lobby. You should still have the option to teleport out of the raid if you'd like, but if you do step out, if you do want to kind of start again, instead of putting you back in the safe area, you would go to somewhere risky, and then you would have to basically, tank test to get back into that safe area. Think something like Zulrah, where you can teleport out of Zulrah, but if you take the scroll, you kind of end up back in the middle of the village, and you have the risk of somebody PKing you as you run back to the bridge. There's a similar problem here with world hopping. Most full loot PvP games, you don't have the option to like spawn into your position at will. These games are typically balanced by one playable map, with more dangerous things further away, and the risk comes from actually getting over to there and then also making your way back to your base or whatever. The ability to hop worlds and just log in is kind of ridiculous, the fact that you can just kind of spawn wherever and now you're ready to fight somebody. So if you know their location, you can literally spawn right on top of them before they can even see you from a distance. This is especially made worse when you can often see people before they see you, and they can catch you off guard by hopping or bringing their friends along. One of the best examples is here at Cerberus, where you can both see Cerberus's attack animations as well as the scythe animation, and basically get ready to attack them as soon as Cerberus dies before they really even have a chance to spot you. Again, even in a singles area, the advantage of having friends is pretty damn strong. In this clip, for example, I think they have one guy who is sitting under Cerberus and red Xing it so that Cerberus doesn't accidentally attack one of them and put them in combat so that they can attack the player, while the other guy is waiting at the other side of the lever to basically call out which way that guy's going, so you don't have to play the guessing game of going up and down the ladder, basically. I don't think that this guy played it perfectly. He probably deserved to die, but when you are tele-blocked and then passed around from different people because you didn't realize that your only option at that point is to log out under them, it can definitely be pretty damn stressful. And yeah, I feel like this is a really frustrating instance where you have like 3 of the best PKers running around and working as a team to kill you. With the ability to world hop, you're also able to clear out every single instance with virtually no time. It's not just that you get to check this one Serb, you get to check all 4 worlds, and every single person doing Serb at that time is going to get cleared. Added with just how fast teleports are, you can really get your team members there over very, very fast. So, if somebody does give you any kind of trouble, well, you call your team member over and they'll be able to, help you out as well. It's especially frustrating that so many people in the high-end PKing community are friends with another. Obviously that makes sense. It's a pretty tight-knit community, but they'll choose to run around in teams and basically pick on noobs instead of, fighting each other. Most of them, if they do accidentally hit each other, they'll get off and basically not attack, which is, I don't know. I think that's a little lame. My solution here may sound extreme, but hear me out. I think that when you world hop, you should have PvP disabled for like 1 minute. You should not be able to attack somebody for 1 minute. That way you can't just spawn into their location and basically attack them. I think it's really silly. Alternatively, and I don't know how this would be done, I feel that when you world hop, you should be put back into a safe spot, or that you're not allowed to log out outside of a safe zone. You would have to return to a safe zone before you're allowed to log out. This may sound really weird, but in other full loot PvP games, I personally played V Rising, and I think Rust does this as well. If you log out somewhere, your body is still corporeal. It still exists in the game even after you've logged out. This means that you can't just log out in the middle of nowhere, or people will see your body on the ground. And in fact, they can even kill you and take your stuff while you're there. You have to make it back to a safe spot before you're allowed to log out. You can't just appear out of thin air like you can in old school RuneScape. I understand that this would come off as a pretty big nerf to PKers, but I think it's necessary so that when they go somewhere, they're not encouraged to also world hop to every single spot and basically clear it all out on every single world. And on the flip side, this would actually encourage fighting for the spot if you're somebody just looking to PVM. If you get somewhere and there's somebody already there, Instead of having to go all the way back to a safe spot, world hop, and check again, maybe now you're more incentivized to bring along gear to fight them and push them off the spot. This kind of organic PvP from people who are both fighting for the same objective and they want the same spot, I think should be a much more substantial part of the game, and not just PKers killing people who have no interest in fighting back. All right, let's talk about sigils. Sigils are overall very good, and honestly, I think that they are probably my favorite part of Deadman mode. I really enjoy them. Yeah, I enjoy acquiring them. I enjoy using them. Like, I think they're a lot of fun, and I'm really glad, and I hope that they kind of stay as a part of the game mode. I really like the ability to invest in player power that's safe and permanent. It feels like you're actually progressing your account as you go. So for example, when you get like a titanium sigil or when you get meticulousness, it really feels like you're at the next step in your account, and a lot of your power is coming from safe options, and you can get away with using cheaper gear and still, taking on bosses that typically that gear would not be very good against. I love how it opens up some new options and strategies for bosses, coming up with what the ideal setup is, whether or not I want to bring a defensive sigil. Maybe I want to use last recall because it's a little bit out of the way. Things like that I really enjoy coming up with, especially, not looking that up and just sort of theory crafting how to deal with every boss on my own. And because you're often not running around with max gear and stuff like that, you're kind of using a little bit more, I guess, shoddy options. It also feels a lot more balanced than leagues, which is kind of something that I really felt about the last leagues, where I felt like the power level just skyrocketed a little bit too high to the point where most of the bosses they stopped even feeling like bosses and then just kind of blew over before you had to really engage with any mechanics. I feel that in Deadman mode, there's a little bit more, I guess, balance between, having an easy time with the bosses without making them so trivial that they kind of just feel like target dummies. One thing I really like with coming up with combinations of sigils is how you can blend more defensive options to lower the entry level and make things such as Inferno or Colosseum a lot easier to do. Or if you're very confident and if you know what you're doing, you can really choose to push the limits and really go for full offensive sigils, things like aggression, things like meticulousness, and whatnot. I would definitely love to see more new sigils because there were a lot of things that kind of came back, but overall, I thought it was a pretty decent roster. I really loved splitting the ninja sigil, which would speed up weapons that were 5 ticks or slower by 1 tick. I think splitting that into all 3 of the combats and making it a little bit more common was fantastic. It still felt really strong because most of the time you're only really going to be using one of the combats anyways, but it wasn't so overbearing that literally every single player in the game was seeking it out, and it was just by far the most prized sigil, and it wasn't even close. I definitely love to see more defensive sigils that kind of double down on the idea of surviving and tanking. I would call these like questing sigils that you're really only using when you're going on quests and stuff like that, and you don't have the luxury of a bunch of inventory slots because so many of them are dedicated to the quest. One idea I had was to take the Rampart sigil, which is quite strong already, and instead make it like 150 defense in all styles, maybe even add some magic defense as well, but the trade-off here is that you would do 50% less damage. Rampart's already a big problem where a lot of PKers are using it because the defensive options are so insanely good even when you're on the offensive, but adding that major drawback of you doing 50% less damage would basically make it unusable in any PvP scenario or in any PvM scenario. I mean, you're not going to use this to get into a boss fight if you're doing half damage. It really drives that niche of allowing people to do quests because I think it's so frustrating that a lot of people can't do their quests because people choose to just camp quest areas and just pick on people who really are just never going to fight back. There's a couple other problematic sigils that I think definitely need to be looked at. One of the biggest issues here is the versatility sigil. And the ability to swap to teleblock. Now, while you can't use versatility to swap your spellbook in combat, many PKers would catch a freeze on the ancient spellbook, and they're not technically in combat yet because unless the other person actually attacks them. So then they would catch the freeze, quickly run behind something, swap to the standard spellbook, and then teleblock that person. And now that person has no more ability to freeze and teleport away or to escape combat for 6 seconds. Their only option is to log out, which has that 6-second timer to log out. Even if you've been out of combat for 6 seconds, you have to wait that full 6 seconds. It's a lot harder to freeze and log out than it is to freeze and teleport. And it also makes it a lot easier to freeze somebody and then pass it on to your teammates, which I've seen. And I mean, that just feels really awful when you have a group of 3 people teleblocking you and then passing you around like an idiot. Like, come on, man, what is that? I think this just obviously needs to be changed. Maybe you just can't use this while you're skulled, or attacking somebody disables it, things like that. But yeah, the ability to swap ancients and then teleblock and then swap back to ancients, I mean, that's just ridiculous, and that should not exist. In addition, the aggression sigil just makes no sense. You're dealing 10% more damage with the trade-off of taking 5% more damage. There should be a much more steep penalty to using these, and I really like the idea of having these like Kiss Curse sigils that have a benefit but also a downside. But I mean, for 10% more damage and only taking 5% more, that's just not a good trade-off. It should be like 20%. You're taking 20% more damage instead. Same idea with Pious Protection, which obviously became one of the most popular sigils in the final hour. I think this thing skyrocketed to like over 100 mil. It decreases damage by 35% if you're using the right prayer, but if you use the wrong prayer, it's only increasing it by 5%. That is nothing at all. Like that is shockingly low, and I don't understand how this is balanced at all. There should be a much more aggressive trade-off that you're getting for the bonus, something that you can only really take advantage of if you're consistently hitting all of your prayers, especially in the finale when most people are just using mage anyways. You just camp mage and you basically have 35% less damage. It's a little ridiculous. With Deadman Armageddon, they also added the ability to skill for sigils. You can now get them from things like fishing, woodcutting, mining. And while I like the system, I think it definitely needs work. I refuse to believe anything other than it was a massive oversight to not reward people for better tiers of resources, so things like sharks or magic logs. Instead, the chance to hit the 1 in 500 drop table was literally just based off experience, which created a meta of farming things such as rune essence, oak logs, salmon, things that you would very quickly, I guess, get the experience, and therefore that became how you get a lot of sigils. And sadly, this kind of flooded the whole market with sigils as people, skilled very, very safely, not very far away from a bank, and they would just get a ton of sigils for virtually no risk. I think they probably realized it's a big mistake, and then it was just too late to change it at that point after people had basically farmed so many sigils into the game and just crashed the price. That being said, I would like to see some way to incentivize people to go to a specific area, just because resources in this game are kind of widely spread and there's not really one consistent, like the further away you go, the better the rewards are. Something that would be really cool would be like certain areas are just designated as like hotspots. So for example, maybe for like an hour, the myth skilled magic logs give you like twice the chance of logs or something like that. I don't know. Just something to encourage skillers to go there. And then that would, of course, also bring PKers. You could, of course, go somewhere else and get resources as well, but this would just create a bit of a hotspot for people who do want to, engage in that while they're skilling. I definitely love to see some changes made to the UI or like a sigil interface, because as it stands right now, it is very, very difficult to manage and sort through all of the sigils. Most of them are like very, very identical in appearance, so it's hard to even tell them apart. There's also no placeholders, so I found that they got lost in my bank very frequently, and I had to just constantly look around to see where they went. And you couldn't even get like a fixed loadout, so I couldn't get like, oh, this is my Zulrah loadout. Here, let me pull out these specific 3, for example. Some sigils also suffer from the fact that you use them very fast and then you want to swap off of them. So things like versatility to swap my spellbook, things like swapping to slaughter to pick a slayer task and then swapping off of it, things like alchemaniac to alch like 5 items and then swap off of it. All of this swapping back and forth just felt super annoying and super tedious, and it reminded me a lot of the same problems that Shattered Relics had back in Leagues 3, where it just really felt like just swapping around all the sigils became more annoying than it was worth. And I would really be curious to see if there was some way to create like a sigil interface that allowed you to either swap very quickly, or some of these sigils like versatility and slaughter just need to be made default. Like you just have them unlocked if you're in a safe zone, and if you want the power outside of a safe zone, then you of course have to have it equipped. One change I think would be really neat would be to have some kind of sigil codex that you would unlock by having to actually activate the sigil and kind of use it up in the process. I don't know if I like the fact that you can get all the sigils, buy whatever you need, use it, and then sell it off like an hour or 2 later once you've actually used it. And instead, I think there would be kind of a little bit more thought put into it if using a sigil meant that you actually, I guess, consumed it in the process. You would still be allowed to trade off any sigils that you got, but there would still be an opportunity cost if you went ahead and activated the relic. Just like if you got a Dexter scroll or an Arcane scroll, you could, of course, use those for Rigor and Augury, or you could trade them off, and actually make money that way. There's a kind of trade-off there. I think this would be a really fun way to have the sigils unlocked. and kind of build up, a library of powers. It reminds me a lot of Diablo 3 has the Kanai Cube, where you would sacrifice legendaries to kind of have the full, I guess, list of legendary powers available to use. Now, I also wanted to brush up on sigil slots. I personally think that you should start with less and end with more. I don't think that having 3 sigil slots through the entire duration is very good. Simply put, it's just too oppressive to have 3 strong sigils at bracket 1, especially when you really don't need to make any account progression to even get there. You can just buy them from the GE, and now you are insanely powerful. You are getting so much power from your sigils without really even having to bring that good gear. I don't know if separating every single bracket with a different economy is like a good thing. I think that might be more complicated than it's worth and create a lot of issues. But yeah, the fact that at bracket 1 you just buy sigils that don't even drop there is a little ridiculous, I think. I've already talked about how some of these permanent unlocks like sigils could be acquired through breach points instead to give people a fair chance. But I also think that in general, as you progress through the brackets, you should unlock more and more sigil slots so that your player is also getting kind of stronger as you move on. The lower brackets, you're usually not even using like more than one good sigil if you're actually trying to level up anyways. So, I think it would be a little bit more fun that as you get more and more, you can kind of unlock more power that way. By the end, I think that there could be up to 5 sigil slots, and these could be broken down into 3 combat relics, 1 skilling relic, and 1 utility relic. I don't like that if you are skilling or using any of the utility sigils, you are taking up a combat sigil. That just feels like too much of a trade-off, and it really kind of removes any incentive or any chance you have at anti-PKing or tanking if somebody does run up on you. Now, of course, you could bring anti-PK sigils with you when you go skilling, but the skilling sigils are so damn powerful that you'd kind of be trolling if you were bringing that instead of the actual good skilling sigils, and instead just sort of eating it if somebody does choose to come up and kill you. For a couple other points about sigils that I didn't really know where to fit in, I think the random sigil that you get at the start is one of the worst parts of the game. I'm not joking. I think being able to choose your combat relic is really cool, even though the melee relic is a lot better than the others, just because of how much I think the game encourages you to level your melee to go up the brackets. But yeah, the random skilling or utility sigil is just awful. Like, I don't think it's defensible at all. And I think your experience in the first couple of hours could be so drastically changed based on what sigil you get with just completely random that I think it's very bad. I think this needs to be either a much smaller pool of like completely inconsequential relics that just don't do very much at all, or they need to allow you to just go ahead and choose one instead. Think about how successful Leagues is when they give you a lot of time to prep in advance about what tier 1 relic you wanted there, and how many people were going with different setups based on what tier 1 relic they were actually planning on. The same exact thing could happen here, where people could plan a different route based on, what sigil they get. I know for me personally, my route changed quite a bit, and honestly, I would have changed it even more if I knew that I was going to get the Sigil of Life, which I did get. And if I didn't get the Sigil of Life, which gives you agility experience as you run, I would have had a significantly worse time. I'm not going to lie. Unfortunately, this also encourages you to make alts and then swap them off, so that if you have other accounts, you basically roll that chance at getting a sigil, and then you just trade them all off, and now your character has 3 good sigils right at the beginning. Like, I don't know, I think that's just way too strong. Even if you get 3 bad ones, I think 3 bad ones is still better than 1 bad one, which is what most people start with. It's not even easy to buy good sigils in like the first hour of the game, because the better sigils are just so in demand that you would have to swap an insane amount of cash to actually go ahead and get one of these sigils sold in like the first 5 minutes of the game or whatever. Also, I don't know why sigils are lost on PVM death. I did lose a sigil of Pious Protection to Leviathan. I just died. And obviously this is my fault. Like, I shouldn't have stayed. I should have went and banked it. But also, like, why do you lose a sigil on Like, what's the upside here? Like, is that necessary? I mean, I don't even know if I don't think I even knew about this at the time, and it just felt kind of bad. It kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And yeah, I don't know. This just felt really weird. Okay, breaches. Last year, I honestly neglected breaches so hard, and when I actually started doing them, I realized how fun they were. So it was definitely my goal this time around to do as much breaches as I can, and I'm really glad I got to experience it a lot more this time around. Now, in short, I will say that the regional breaches were great, and the clump breaches are kind of trash. I think they're pretty lame. With the clump breaches and just how many people are in one spot, it feels honestly unplayable to go to these without using Entity Hider just to hide people. You can often see bosses that are like flickering in and out without it. So you'll like try to click them and they just disappear. And it's even on the mainstream, I think you would see that sometimes. It's very, very annoying. Whether you use Entity Hider or not, there was many times where you would start getting attacked by a player and you honestly had no idea what was even going on or who was attacking you. Like, you don't even know if it's an NPC or if it's somebody else. Like, it just, there's so many times where I felt like I was getting attacked and I didn't even realize it for like a couple seconds. And then you're basically just spam eating and you don't know who's attacking you, don't know what to pray against. Like, it's just very, very frustrating. And on the flip side, Entity Hider actually helps PKers quite a lot here, because if you don't know, you can actually add people to your ignore list and then put the setting that doesn't block ignored players. That way you could individually track certain players in the huge mix of combat, basically. I had to do this because there was one guy that just kept killing me at like every single breach over and over and over again. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that they have me on their ignore list because maybe they think I'm like easy prey, or maybe they saw that I was bringing like a scythe along and now they want to try to kill me for stuff. And yeah, it was just so annoying because I would just like, I had to basically add them to my ignore list just so I could see if they were trying to get me again, basically. In the clumps, bosses also die most of the time before you can even get like more than one hit off, if that. Especially the KBD and Cerberus. I think these guys need like way more HP because it feels like they literally die like before they've even like spawned fully. It's crazy how fast they die. I also think that the Mage Arena 2 bosses probably need to go. I think they're pretty annoying in the worst part of breaches because first off, you can only deal magic damage to them, so they often just are kind of left alive a lot longer, and they kind of hold off the entire rest of the breach, and they kind of slow it down while you wait for majors to kill it. And they also can do very weird things like freezing or teleblocking you. I think I got frozen by one of these guys one time, and I started panicking, thinking I was getting PK'd, before realizing, no, it was just one of these Mage Arena 2 bosses. Pretty damn annoying. One change I'd like to see, not only for the clump breaches, but also for the regional breaches, is instead of spawning monsters in like a sequence of 1 by 1 by 1, I think there needs to be like 25 monsters spawned all at the same time. That way, if you're at one of these clump breaches, you can kind of pick a monster and really try to capitalize on it. Whereas the way it works right now is you're basically just like playing whack-a-mole and trying to get your one hit off as each monster spawns and, you know, hoping that your damage hits. Remember that points are only given for the damage that you do if you hit the top 10, which I think is a terrible idea. I think they should change it so that you get points. Basically, if you do any damage to a boss, you get points. That should be how it works. And I didn't even know about this till like halfway through, and I was getting like no points in the early breaches because I thought it was just about dealing damage. But no, you really need to find monsters that are weak to your style and try to get onto that top 10 list. And at the clump breaches, that's just very difficult to do. I think that rewarding the MVP is still probably good as far as, you know, loot goes, because I think there should be some reward for bringing good gear along and actually trying to maximize your damage at the breach. The Ruby Bolt nerf from last time was also really good because I didn't like how much it felt like a kind of a roulette of everybody just trying to Ruby Bolt spec, and whoever happened to get the spec off would, you know, get MVP. Regardless, I think that rewards definitely need to be made more common at these breaches. I think it's a good thing for players to get that big drop and not just like grind away at a breach just to get emblems and emblems and emblems. It's like they should feel that excitement of hitting like a VLS. Just making them more common, I think, would go a long way. If emblems are going to be as common as they are, I also think that they should make them, you know, more rare, but instead it's like a tier 7 emblem or something like that. That instead of giving you 1.5 million points, maybe it gives you like 5 million points. Even though every tier 5 emblem was like around 400k cash, it was really annoying having to like pick them up because that would actually eat up into inventory slots. So by the time I got like 5 or 6 of them, I would be like dropping manta rays from my inventory, and then I would have to like go and run to the Grand Exchange to kind of turn them in and stuff like that. Speaking of inventory space, I do think that making the looting bag as well as the rune pouch a lot cheaper was a fantastic change, and being able to bring your looting bag to places and use that to not have to eat into your supplies, so to speak, was just amazing. I really love that, and yeah, excellent change. Same thing with removing the announcement when you get the drop. Just like I said, it feels good to get that big drop. But what doesn't feel good is as soon as you get a drop, it's announced that you got a Vestas Longsword, and now there's 27 different PKers trying to add your name to the ignore list so that they can go ahead and snipe you in the middle of a huge crowd. Now, on the topic of PvP weapons, I do think that Vesta's Longsword, Morgan's Javelin, and even the Voidwaker, I think these weapons are already really damn powerful, and they kind of become borderline problematic when they're comboed with one another. I know that for me, I really didn't enjoy the guessing game of, are they going to VLS spec me? Are they going to Voidwaker spec me? Basically got to play for both of them, and they're very accurate, deal a lot of damage, and it's like a coin flip at that point. And I kind of feel that making them more rarer than last year actually just made it more frustrating, as you just never get to use it or play around with it. And instead, it just feels like it's relegated to the better PKers who are already willing to go pretty risky and stuff like that, and they just kind of get to blast you away with these significantly better weapons that you just have no real chance against unless you're willing to put up the same amount. Same thing kind of goes with the PVM weapons, things like the Corrupted Sight, the Corrupted Twisted Bow. I definitely agree that these were pretty common in the last Deadman mode. However, I enjoyed the fact that it was kind of a budget option to get into higher end PVM for players. I think I was able to buy these for like 1 mil to 2 mil, and even with just that amount of risk, you could go and do some of the harder bosses and still feel pretty strong doing them. At the end of the day, I think using sights and T-bows is just fun for a lot of players, especially casual players who might not have access to it in the main game. Obviously, if you've been doing raids and Inferno and you already have all the best weapons, and I understand that it's probably not as cool to use it, but even if it needs like a small nerf to compensate, I think I'd be fine with that, just to keep these corrupted weapons a little bit more broadly used and a little bit cheaper and easier to access. As it stands right now, I do think that there's a pretty big price gap between more of like the budget weapons and then the actual options that just really feels pretty insurmountable. Like you're having to risk a significantly larger amount to actually start using one of like the decent weapons in the game. Finally, let's talk about Deadman points, leaderboards, and high scores. Now, I understand that for most people, they might not be interested in this, but this is something that I chose to engage with. So I just kind of want to talk about my experience and what could be done in the future, I think, to make this grind a little bit more fun and a bit more enticing to other players as well. Personally, I don't think I would be doing this in the future unless some of these changes are made, mainly about how PKers just don't need to worry about points at all, as it really does feel kind of silly for me to like go and chase high scores, and PKers just don't even care about points at all. They had like literally 20% of what I had. I've already talked about the 2-week format, and I really love that. I also really enjoyed how there was some actual decision on what you wanted to work towards, and it wasn't just like you have to complete every single task in leagues. It definitely feels weird where like the person who got number 1 in the last leagues, they literally completed every single task available to them with like 2 weeks to spare, and then that's just it. That's very strange to me. I think there should be more strategy on what you want to focus on and what you want to forego, rather than just like grind everything until you're done. I really like the breach cap in this Deadman mode. That way it didn't feel like you had to wake up for every single breach, and it also made it not feel as bad if you missed a random breach. That being said, it should be super obvious that you should have some way of being able to tell how close you are to actually hitting the breach cap. Especially for me, towards the end of the second week, I was really starting to stress because I just had no idea how many more points I still needed to get to hit the breach cap, and I was just going to every single breach constantly. It would have been a lot nicer to know like, oh, you're like 8,000 away, so then you can kind of chill a little bit more. In general, I think there should be much more like interface telling you what points you've already gotten, how much KC you've gotten from all the monsters, because otherwise you just kind of had to resort to high scores, or just like keep in the back of your mind like, oh, did I do that boss one time or not? You have to basically remember all of that on your own. Just to reiterate, I do think that points need to be a major point of progression, not just for the very few who want to chase leaderboards. And I really hated how many times I found that there were people killing me who didn't have to engage whatsoever with my primary chase, and if I fought back, I was just wasting my time and pushing myself further and further behind. I would honestly prefer that this entire point system to just be scrapped altogether, and the idea of like Deadman high scores just kind of scrapped if this is not changed, because I just don't see any real value in going for it if it's literally just carrot on a stick. Again, I've already talked about most of this in the asymmetry of progression and how I think that could be changed. I will have a couple more suggestions when we talk about the finale in just a bit. Before that though, I did want to talk about a couple of individual tasks and point feedback that I felt like was probably needed to be looked at. I find that the combat achievements have simply become too prominent of an end game for the seasonal game modes. It's the same problem that I had in Leagues 4, where it felt like some of the combat achievements were not just good points, but they were double dipping, sometimes quintuple dipping on how many points you were getting by doing them. You get points for completing tasks and you get bonus points for completing every task of a boss, and you get bonus points for completing every task in a combat achievement tier. And even the tasks alone give some pretty good points on top of the fact that you're already getting points simply for going and, killing the boss. I really started to dread how much I felt the second week would be me running around and going down a checklist of completing as many, Grandmaster and Master combat achievements as I could, because, 100 for a Master and 150 points for a Grandmaster is insane. That is so much points. Luckily, things like the tier completions were not super doable, just because a lot of bosses do have kill count requirements, and realistically, you're not going to get 150 Cox completions inside of a 2-week format on top of doing all the other bosses that you probably would need to complete a whole tier. So this wasn't as bad, I think, as it could be if it was a longer mode. Just like Leagues, though, I don't know how much I like the fact that combat achievements have just become the go-to endgame. And then this is just what you have to do now. I think in Leagues, it was a little bit more bearable, and I kind of had some fun with it simply because, you were so powerful, and there were some fun ways to come up with like off-meta strategies that you didn't really need to know how to actually do the combat achievement in the main game. You could kind of cheese it using sigils. But in Deadman mode, it's so much more annoying having to like either come up with it on your own or, learn on the spot, because you're also going with like the risk of death. Even getting there can be kind of annoying. Sometimes you're going there with like a really weird setup and stuff like that. And yeah, I don't know, man. I just felt like doing combat achievements and having to like learn them was so much more tilting when I was having to die and then do the dangerous run back every single time. Like it was so draining. I don't know. For me, I think the game mode should be more about, completing every boss like 75 times, getting a wide array of different bosses, maybe engaging in clues, doing some achievement diaries, just kind of showing a broader array of the game, rather than, I feel like, combat achievements that just gave so many points that you had to do towards the end. I could maybe excuse this as being something that rewards skillful players as opposed to just, grinding Zulrah for 75 times or whatever. But so many of the Grandmaster tasks are related to raids and related to group sizes as well. You need a specific group to do them. If you don't have that group, then you're just not going to be able to get a lot of these tasks done. Deadman mode is already a format which so heavily rewards group play that I don't think there needs to be even more bonus that locks you out of getting these points if you're not playing in a group. It just felt like I'm already at a disadvantage for playing solo, and now I have this barrier that I can't cross because I don't have people to raid with. I really worry that if they keep doing this with seasonal game modes, there's going to be more and more prominence around boosting for combat achievements. I don't know how many people actually did that, or if they just had clanmates to play with, but I could definitely see people starting to just sell off combat achievement selling if you need like a TOB speed clear or something like that, because I just don't think that these need to be such a massive part of the end game. Or a couple other things I think need to be looked at. Some of the kill counts for the Barrows as well as the Moons of Peril should probably require you to kill all the bosses. I ended up realizing that I could literally just do Barrows without having to kill a single Barrows brother, and I spent like half an hour here literally just running through the crypts and opening up 0 kill chests. It was really silly, and yeah, that should probably be changed. Same thing with Moons of Peril. I saw people doing this with just killing one boss. You should probably have to require all 3 of them to get the points. I like that the diaries did reward quite a bit of points, as it did kind of, reward you for skilling without having you to go max. But one thing I did notice was that diary tier completions did require you to complete previous tiers, which did lock me out of some diaries. I couldn't get the elite completion because there might have been a hard diary that I could not have completed. For example, getting Bones to Peaches in the Lumberjane Drainer diary. Now, I'm not entirely against this, as elite tasks already give a lot of points, and the tier completion is a 50% bonus, but I think that this needs to be made a little bit more explicit, as it's inconsistent with Leagues, where you did complete your Leagues task by completing every single task in a tier. You did not also have to require completing all the previous tiers to get that done. I also felt like some boss completions just did not work when you completed all the diaries, and I wasn't getting as many points as I expected to. I think this might have something to do with tasks that were auto-completed. Tasks that required an instance, for example, were kind of auto-completed, but then you did not get bonus points when you completed all the tasks in, I guess, for that boss. But I'm not 100% sure about this. I just know that I was pretty scared of doing any bosses that had these kind of tasks, because I just didn't know if I was going to actually get the amount of points that I expected. And finally, let's talk about the finale. And I'll just kind of call it what it is. It's a Mickey Mouse finale. I mean, I'm not going to lie, guys. I think that the finale is a complete and utter joke. Like, It's not very fun to play. I don't think it's very fun to watch, and I think that the finale needs to have some pretty massive changes, or honestly, it should probably just be scrapped entirely if this is going to be the, I guess, continued result of what we get. The finale feels almost unplayable without a clan. I think it definitely needs to be a lot easier to, like, join some kind of team. Maybe they could have, like, signups at the GE that will just put you into, like, a clan rejects or something like that, rather than having to go beg around the GE for whatever clan chat will basically take you, just so that you kind of have a chance to do anything there. Even then, it is so difficult to see anything about what's happening in the finale. Like, I was trying to use entity hider and disable player indicator, and just I felt like nothing really worked to make me have any idea what was going on. Basically, there wasn't nearly enough monsters the way I expected, and also the quarters were way too close and tight. It was also the same spot every single time north of Falador, so there would be teams that would basically take their position hours before the fog even started rolling in, instead of having a random spot or making these people move to kind of get to the new spot and get the territory. It really just felt like you were kind of in this big chaotic mess, and hopefully maybe you get lucky and you can survive. It seems like the finale brings out the worst in people, because just like almost every Deadman mode, there is so much drama around the finale from people doing really scummy behavior. Bitter made a fake clan to bring people in, and then about halfway through the finale, once the numbers had kind of died down, went ahead and left the clan and went back to his original clan chat so that they can go ahead and kill all the people who were in that original clan. You can see the dots change on their minimap before they cut to black, to avoid showing them switching clans in the middle of the finale. You may think I'm just speculating here, but no, they forgot to delete their VOD. You can still see it on their kick of them actually going ahead and doing it live. You can even hear them uttering Rot B1 under their breath as they swap back to their original clan.
That might have been a big mistake. Rot B1.
I talked earlier about muling and the prominence of clan banks that allow people to supply whatever they need without having to risk anything. Well, here's Nish for the win, showing off the clan bank of EOP, who won the Bracket 2 finale. Of course, this could be a real player who felt confident enough to run around with 76 Rings of Suffering in their bank, but I have a feeling that they didn't leave the safe zone very much. I don't see how this is anything but an instant disqualification for EOP in the Bracket 2 finale. Even worse was the blatant cheating, like these multi-box accounts that sprung up in every single bracket in the finales. Dozens of accounts wearing the exact same gear with very similar names would stand on the exact same tile in Falador, and as soon as somebody stepped to multi, you would eat all of their bolts and die in like one hit. It is ridiculous. If you don't know what multi-boxing is, this doesn't mean that one person is playing on more than one account at the same time. That's perfectly acceptable. Multi-boxing is one action being sent to multiple accounts all at the same time, so that they all do the exact same thing. You can see an example here from World of Warcraft. This guy's playing on 40 accounts. He clicks Earthshock one time, and it sends that to all 40 of the clients. They all cast Earthshock at the same time. The same thing is happening here. You can see all of these accounts targeting the same player, waiting to one-shot them as soon as they step into multi. And in fact, you can even see them all move tick perfect into the same position. Maybe they're just that coordinated though, I don't know. I simply do not understand why the Deadman format continues to cater to clans that will blatantly cheat and grief other players. It makes no sense. In previous Deadman modes, there would be a 1v1 finale that would get DDoSed constantly, and I think that the embarrassment that they suffered has made them go back to a multi-finale. As such, it feels like these multi-clans have been rewarded for ruining the event for everybody else, and then they continue to go ahead and cheat. The winner of Bracket 5, a Reign of Terror member known as Tom the Bomb, was also in the 2018 Deadman Mode finale, where they won second place after most of their opponents suffered a DDoS, and they won, beating AFK opponents. The same thing happened the year before that in 2017, when Rot members won because every one of their opponents was getting DDoSed. To the surprise of no one, the Rot member also got banned for botting that year and disqualified because of that. I'm not saying that Rot is responsible for all of these DDoS attacks, but it is quite a coincidence that virtually all the drama of Deadman Mode seems to revolve around one clan and their heinous actions. The fact that they make no effort whatsoever to reform their image, and in fact relish in the hatred that they receive from the rest of the community, makes it a little bit difficult to give them the benefit of the doubt. I also think it's a little bit rich to encourage people to wear the rot tag with the promise of protection, and then after, use those people as a shield to deflect any accountability from members who have the rot tag. So much toxicity seems to stem back to this same exact community, and I really feel like this needs to be addressed. Rewarding them with prize money after doing all this just feels like a slap in the face to anybody trying to play this game in a legit manner. I really feel like there should be more pressure on content creators who continue to work with rot, knowing fully well what kind of behavior they engage with. I got into a bit of a spat with Mazhar over this, who is the #1 points earner for the last 2 Deadman modes. I really feel like continuing to work with rot while casting a blind eye at all the scummy behavior that they do feels like you're implicitly endorsing it and continuing to let it fester. And these are just some of the logs they feel comfortable sharing in one of their videos. I can only imagine what is said when they're not recording. I don't think it's fair for these content creators who make so much of their viewership off of these seasonal modes to continue to work with the same people who ruin it for everybody else. I think we can all agree that a 1v1 finale would obviously be way better to watch and way better to play in, and the Deadman mode All-Stars finale definitely shows that with significantly higher viewership than the DMM finale had. If this absolutely is impossible out of the risk of getting DDoSed again, I would love to see the finale changed to be invite only, where only the top 200 players in every single bracket would be allowed in. This was already how it was done in the past. However, basing it off of the Deadman point system seems like a much better way to track progression and kind of reward players for engaging with the system. This would also encourage point farming in the lower brackets as well, because if you are going for the high scores and you're trying to get the top of the Deadman points, really the only place where you can do that is at the max bracket. It also curbs the issue of how easy it is to build a pure in the lower brackets. Go spend as much time as you want raining terror on anybody, and then showing up to the finale and being able to contribute just as much because numbers are so important. I think the goal should be to get as many of your players into that top 200 so that you have a better chance without making it a complete shit show of players who have spent less than 10 hours on their account. This also solves the problem of multi-boxers that would just not exist if there was actually a requirement to make it into the finale. You can still do the big multi-finale just for fun and just kind of let everybody in on it. It's pretty chaotic anyways, so I think that can be a fun experience, but I think that there should be more individual agency, both for the Leaderboards award and for actually surviving the finale. As it stands between the cheating and how much of a mess the finale can be, I personally would advocate for getting rid of the cash prize entirely, or to push that more onto the high scores and the leaderboards instead. It makes no sense that a game mode that has swapping, which is kind of pay to win, and clanning also has a real monetary reward behind it when something like Leagues doesn't and has been getting less and less competitive attention through the years. I don't think that taking away the cash prize would suddenly stop all the botting or the griefing or the cheating, but at least it would not reward them for this behavior. A lot of the hype behind this last man standing finale seems to go away when, after the finale is all done, they still need to take some time to review who even cheated to get there. And with that, I think I'd like to wrap up everything I had to talk about. It was definitely a pretty long video, so I do appreciate it if you watched it all the way through. I know not everything I say will be pretty popular, and I definitely probably rustled a couple feathers, but I hope you guys can understand that this isn't to be a witch hunt against anybody, but rather ideas on how the game mode can continue to improve. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed Deadman mode. I will hopefully have a highlights video of my own experience up eventually, and I look forward to hopefully getting an announcement of Leagues 5 in the upcoming Summer Summit.